Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. Today I'll be speaking with Dr. Katherine Ramsland. Dr. Ramsland to date has written over 1,500 articles and 70 books, including How to Catch a Killer and The Mind of a Murderer. She's also worked with Dennis Rader, known as the BTK Killer, on his autobiography. Dr. Ramsland is the author of the shadowboxing blog at Psychology Today. She also teaches seminars on extreme offenders to death investigators and homicide detectives. Here's my interview with Dr. Katherine Ramsland. I want to start out with having you tell me a little bit about yourself, what your professional titles are, some accolades, and what it was that sent you in the direction of becoming a professor of forensic psychology and becoming an expert on serial killers at that. Which I know that's a lot.
Yes. I'll try to put it in a nutshell. I'm Dr. Katherine Ramsland. I'm a professor of forensic psychology at DeSales University, as well as the assistant provost. I'm also a published author of 69 books currently, with more in the works. And I did not aspire to become a serial killer expert, but it is where I ended up because I was writing for a website called the Crime Library back in the late 1990s. And it was picked up by Court TV, became their resource website. So I was working for Court TV. At the same time, I was getting a degree in a master's degree in forensic psychology. And I just was doing it to enhance my work, but I ended up becoming part of a lot of documentaries, and people were quoting me, and then Crime Library allowed me to write on anything I wanted to write on. So I amassed about well over 200 stories on serial killers. And as a result, I became a go-to person. And also I teach a class at the undergraduate and at the graduate level on extreme offenders, mostly serial killers. And in the process, I've spoken to a number of serial killers, most notably the 5 years I spent with Dennis Rader putting together a book called Confession of a Serial Killer, where we worked very closely together to document what he calls his dark journey. And as a result of that, I have gotten even more opportunities of future projects. So it wasn't a direction I necessarily aspired to go in, but it's very interesting. I'm glad I'm doing it. And it gives me a lot of stuff for my courses and as well for my writing.
When you were younger, before you got into all this, did you know what direction you did want to go to in life?
Wanted to be an athlete. And then when I was 15, I broke my arm and leg, and that put an end to that. Then I wanted to be an artist, but then I started writing, and it just grabbed me. I loved it. So I wanted to be a writer. I did not expect to be a college professor. That evolved in a kind of circuitous way, but here I am. So.
Well, one can certainly say you're an artist in a sense, with your books, and the work that you do is definitely, unique and one of a kind, like a lot of artists are.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I really like to do books in areas that most people have not been in. Like I love the pioneering factor, and I love that what I'm doing often is unique. I don't think I would like to do books that just cover territory other people have done.
Right, regurgitating everything everybody else has written about.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate that I've had editors support for many of the things I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you were getting your feet wet in the field when it came to working with, murderers, rapists, and violent offenders, did you feel at first that you were ready mentally when it came to details, such as crime scene photos and manipulation, intimidation, and all the doom and gloom that comes with, crime and studying it and talking to offenders and so on and so forth?
Well, definitely I've evolved. I remember the very first true crime book I read, I think was about Ed Gein. A friend gave it to me. This years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And I wanted to just throw it away. I wanted to get it out of the house. It felt icky reading it. So I've clearly come a long ways from those days. But I think because I also had taught philosophy for 15 years, actually, at Rutgers University, it had given me some tools for distancing. Also, I had a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I had been a therapist for a while. So I think approaching this stuff clinically gives you a very different perspective on it. So I think the tools I've gotten from the academic world for other contexts have helped me to be able to keep distance on some of the grittier things in true crime.
So you've written on so many subjects, like you said, 69 books that I've been fascinated with since I was a teenager, and one of which is vampirism and the supernatural. And in the past year, I've got to know an inmate by the name of Joshua Rudiger, who is a vampiric murderer. He's actually facing his second homicide case that he caught in prison 2 years ago. And I wanted to ask your thoughts on, not only him, but his case from a psychological perspective, if you've delved into his case at all.
I've delved into this case. I want to ask you some questions. Because now that you said you've been in touch with him, I mean, I know he had a number of psychiatric evaluations from the time he was a child, had serious instability, let's say, lower IQ, as I understand it, and got a pretty bad start in life from the way he had been treated and neglected even as a baby. So I think some of his things are reactive, certainly delusional, because he went back and forth between calling himself a samurai, a ninja, a vampire. He would drink blood from people whose throats he slashed. He apparently killed somebody that way, a woman, and assaulted 3 homeless men. So that's what he went to trial for, is the murder of or I guess they called it manslaughter of the woman, because he claimed he hadn't meant to kill her, but he was just trying to feed off of her. But he has these psychiatric diagnoses, so that's part of the issue, is how much of what he has to say can be trusted. So I'm curious what your experience has been in contacting him.
Honestly, and I mean, no offense when I say this about him, he almost seems like baby-like,
Right.
how he speaks, and is like, yeah, almost like a
Right.
4 or 5, 6-year-old child would do. And he still says he's a samurai, and
Right.
he's from his parents are from Egypt and I think Bangkok, and he's anywhere between, I want to say, 2,600 and 3,200 years old. And
Okay.
he's at first he denied, being adopted and this and that, but then I found somebody who used to speak to him actually, and told me not only about his past, but he was abused in prison and everything, and gave me the name of the man that used to abuse him. And Josh was kind of, shocked when I found that out. But everything that, Josh says is, delusional, to the extreme. He says that he has to feed off of blood, to survive, but he gets an injection in prison every 2 weeks so he doesn't have to drink blood. And he still believes, he's a vampire, and he killed a man 2 years ago in prison. He beat him to death, I believe, and drank his blood. And he's trying to get into a mental hospital right now, actually, because he's taken advantage of all the time in prison by staff and, offenders alike, taking his food, his clothing, you name it, sexual, abuse at that too.
I think he should have gone to a psychiatric institution right from the get-go and not to a prison, because he could have been treated. He could have been put on medications. Lacking that, of course, he's going to continue with his delusions. And it's a shame, but that happens in crime cases all too often, because juries just don't want to risk the possibility of an evaluation by mental health experts that might free someone like him. And so often they think the only choice they really have is to send this person to prison.
He did tell me that no forensic psychologist or anybody would understand him because they don't believe in the supernatural, and he can't
Right.
be diagnosed, and the Vatican knows who he is, and so on and so forth. He genuinely believes he's this vampire, and it's pretty scary and really sad at the same time that he was once walking the streets. And he claims more victims than Richard Chase, actually, who's also a vampiric murderer and serial killer at that.
Well, Richard Chase didn't think of himself as a vampire. That was a moniker the press put on him, or the cops did too as well. He just simply thought his blood was dissolving and he was being erased. That's another kind of delusion. So he needed the blood, but it wasn't the same kind of thing as Rudiger, who actually identifies with the persona of a vampire and talks about being, 2,000, 3,000 years old. That was not the case with Richard Chase. And Chase as well should have gone to a mental institution where he had been. He clearly had a delusional disorder. He'd committed suicide in prison. But again, it's the criminal justice system. They just don't, juries just don't want to deal with that. And also, I think with Chase, he had been taking street drugs. So juries tend to think that if they take street drugs, that just makes their mental illness worse. And the drugs were taken by choice. So that makes them criminally responsible. And it's hard to get juries to understand that that's not really criminal responsibility just because you've taken some LSD or smoke some dope. That's not exactly what's going to worsen your delusions, but it depends on who the attorneys are and how they're arguing something.
Do you feel like somebody like say Chase or Rudiger could be rehabilitated in the sense of being able to be a productive citizen, even if in prison or a mental hospital every day, forced medications or injections for life, to where they can be around people and not, attack them or, feed into their like delusions or fantasies around others?
Well, I mean, if the delusion is coming from a psychotic condition like schizophrenia, there are medications that will certainly change the way that person identifies themselves and feels about themselves. It will change them. Now, they definitely have to have some kind of cognitive therapy as well to change the delusions. But I think the medications are certainly going to make them feel differently about it, and it will directly treat some of the symptoms that they have. But it's not possible for me without having actually had some sessions or something with Rudiger for me to be able to say he could be put back into a community in a pro-social way. I don't know. I don't know if Chase could have been either. He had been institutionalized before. His parents got him out claiming that they would take care of him, but then he kind of freaked them out, so they neglected him. And he really didn't have much of a chance to attempt it because he didn't have any supervision. So I just don't think we have the mental health facilities in our country to support the kind of intense oversight that would be needed for someone like that, because it's not just about giving them medications, it's making sure they take them, making sure they're accountable. And we really are lacking in those kinds of resources.
Why do you think that is?
Taxpayers. I think that's the simplest answer. Nobody wants to pay more taxes because it's expensive to treat people in that kind of closely, intensely watched supervision. It's expensive. So that means more taxes, or politicians spending money better. And I don't think we can expect that of politicians, but that's as far as I'm going with that question.
Right. And in turn, they end up refusing them to mental hospitals and put them in emergency rooms and handcuffing them to beds, days or weeks on end, and then just releasing
and putting them in
streets.
prisons.
Yeah, right.
Many
exactly.
prisons are full of people who should not be there because they don't get any kind of mental health resources. I know some offenders who tell me it's so difficult to be in a prison, in part because of the people who really are psychotic and not being treated. And they yell, they ramble, they can be dangerous. So other offenders also have issues with this.
So this next question, I get asked this a lot. And when it comes to interviewing prisoners for yourself, how do you mentally prepare and remain neutral when it comes to learning or hearing about things they've done or they fantasize about, especially say when it comes to sex crimes or crimes against children?
Well, I think that's the clinical aspect of this. I'm in it to learn about it. And then turn what I learn into something I can teach to others. So if I'm talking to an offender about, something they've done to children, for example, or if they talk about strangling someone or hanging someone or, cutting them up, I think because I have a goal that's educational, for training. I mean, I do some police training sometimes, but I also have classes and write books. I think the goal helps me to keep perspective on it. Now, the way to prepare always for me is to learn as much as I can about the offender before I ever talk to them, because I already know that they will spin things, in a way that will, meet some whatever goal they have, whatever agenda they have. So I want to be sure I know the facts of a case before I go in. Not to say that I will call them out on lies and deception. I won't necessarily, depends on what I'm trying to learn, but at least I'll know what's their pattern. How are they approaching some of these things? With Dennis Rader, for example, he wrote out his crimes in details in long letters. He would take police reports and mark them all up and then tell me what really happened versus what the police thought happened. So he was pretty forthcoming about what he actually did in terms of stalking, killing, and what he did afterward. But he had his own issues with some things that clearly he did not want me to know that he had told police he had been abusive with dogs. So he didn't like that I had read the police transcripts of the interrogation that they did, because he wanted to present himself to me in a specific way. So that's just a small example, but I have to know going in as much as I can, because I know that will always be the case. And I'm dealing with someone right now, I'm not going to name him, but it's very clear that he wants me to think of him in a certain way. And I know things about him that he's not talking about, at least not yet. So that hiding part means that we won't have a very productive time of this until he starts recognizing that I know things and he's going to have to talk about them, or, that's the end of it. And I won't always stay for very long with an offender who just wants to blather on about himself. That's of no use to me. I only really talk with those who want to explore, because I have the tools to help them explore. And if they're not interested, if they just want to be narcissistically, inclined to do nothing but talk about themselves, well, I don't waste a lot of time on that. If I see that there's something worthwhile that we can learn that will contribute to our knowledge base about these offenders, then I'm in, and I'm in maybe for years. But if that's not forthcoming, I'll move on.
So there's never been any instances where you felt uncomfortable or anything with any offenders?
Well, I'm not uncomfortable in terms of being afraid of them. Certainly sometimes I don't like hearing some of the details. I mean, who wants to hear about a little girl being hanged from a pipe in a basement,
right,
while a guy masturbates on her? I mean, that's horrible stuff to hear. And I move past that because I want to hear more about, why did he think that was, why was that the ultimate act after murdering 3 other people that day? Why was that the one thing he savored? Why was that the thing he saved? He had a daughter himself. What was he thinking? So for me, it's more the psychological stuff. Yes, I have to hear the details, and they are uncomfortable. But I have to be able to let them talk about those if I want to press more deeply.
In regards with Dennis Rader, when did all that come about? When working with him, did he reach out to you, or did you reach out to him?
Well, neither. What happened is when he was arrested in 2005, a woman approached him and wanted to write a book with him, and they began a correspondence. She kind of became the gatekeeper, so nobody could get access to him unless she was on her say-so, which set her up for multiple lawsuits. And it was about 5 years had passed, and I saw her on Facebook. I knew about her from news reports. And I asked her, whatever happened to your book with Dennis Rader? And she knew who I was because she had one of my books, and she begged me to take it over. She wanted out. She wanted a competent person to come in and take it, which doesn't mean it was as easy as that, because then I had to write a proposal for a book that the victims' families would approve, in part because they would be the recipients of a large percentage of the proceeds, and also because even though they did not want a book out there about, from Dennis Rader, they knew they weren't going to be able to stop it, but this gave them a little bit of control over the kind of book it would be and the point of the book. Others had approached them, writing more tabloid-oriented true crime, and they had turned them down. And because I wanted to do one that would benefit criminal justice and forensic psychology and law enforcement, they were inclined to want to see what I could produce. So it actually took a couple of years to get that into place. In the meantime, I got to know Dennis Rader better. We talked on the phone, we played chess, and he wasn't keen about me taking over either, because he really liked working with the other woman. But since it was inevitable, she was going to leave the project, he did like my approach. The victims' families and their attorney appreciated what I was trying to do, and that's how it got into place. So it wasn't simple by any means, and it was very time consuming.
How did Rader feel when you told him about the proceeds going to the victim's family? Did he have any qualms, about that, or did he feel any type of way?
Well, the reason that was happening was because of him. The other woman who started this got him to sign his life rights over to the victims' families. So that was what I walked into, which was very difficult for me to persuade publishers who were interested in this to want to come aboard and be limited by a contract of that nature. He didn't have to sign it, but he did. So he already was in that kind of a association with the victims' families. Anyone who was going to work with him had to agree to it. So that was really on him. Of course, he was interested in that. Now he's not, by the way. He doesn't, that was her idea, and he was willing to go along with it. But now that it's all over, the book is out. We've done a 4-part documentary on it that appeared on A&E this past January. Now that all that's out, he wants to be free of this agreement, but it's not that simple. He signed his life rights over to them.
Right, and there's probably no way he ever can, right? Especially with the son of Sam Law. I can't imagine, even if he didn't sign his rights over, I imagine he couldn't profit off of any books or anything.
No, the son of Sam Law doesn't apply to all states. It's only a few places, and it's even been struck down in many instances. It isn't. He can still make money. Believe me, any offender can make money. They just need an agent on the outside who'll figure out how to hide it. So he could if he wanted to, and I don't have any doubt that he probably is from some people. But he can't openly make money on this because the victim's family trust would sue him. But on the other hand, so what? Nothing's going to happen to him. He's not going to get an extra jail term over it, right? He's in prison for life. So who cares if he violates the contract? They care, but nothing will happen to him as a result.
A little loss of TV or phone here and there, which isn't really anything on multiple life sentences.
Right.
In Confession of a Serial Killer, the four-part series, you had made mention that at first when you were working with Rader, he would send you codes or puzzles to solve early on in your correspondence. And there was one in which the words BTK is what he wanted you to find. Were there any other codes that he wanted you to solve besides that one?
Yeah, there was one, I laid this all out in the first chapter. He started out by sending me half of the alphabet with words that corresponded to each letter, and he sent the other half to the other woman who had started this all going. So that meant she and I had to work together to figure out, because then what he would do is he wrote out a narrative with A, B, C, D, and then you had to go back and figure out what that all related to. On top of that, he sent pictures he had cut out from newspapers and magazines that were circled and had the A, B, C, D, I guess, juxtaposition. So it was kind of a complicated layered code system, but in the end, it was unworkable for us to use for the book. So I ended up creating the code that we would use for the book. And I did that by looking at the things that were meaningful to him. And then in the number 3 being one of those, and then the whole idea of a cave and, deep dwellers and all of that. So I used a lot of cave metaphor stuff, always in 3s that he liked. And so that's what we ended up using.
You've written 69 books now, and I've written over 1,200 published articles, which is astonishing in itself, not even considering everything else you've accomplished and continue to accomplish. Are you working on any new projects, or maybe in the planning stages with any upcoming projects that you're able to speak about?
I can't speak about a couple that are sort of up in the air. I'll tell you about a few. I did sign for a 3-novel deal with a publisher, Level Best Books, and the first one has just been edited and is going to come out in August. It's called Ice Cream Man, but it's Ice Cream Man. So the Ice Cream Man is a nasty guy, and that is about that series is about a forensic psychologist who runs a PI agency, and it's called Nutcrackers because she takes on hard nuts to crack. So she takes on very twisty, complex cases, and including those that have rumors of ghosts or paranormal aspects to them. She's more of a Scully than a Mulder, but she stays open, she's willing to explore. Usually she debunks most of the things that she sees, but here and there things happen as well. So she with her team take on these cases, and that's 3 novels. I also am an executive producer for a show called Murder House Flip, which is a design show. And that's about, our team goes in and to a house that a murder has been committed in, or multiple murders, and we redesign, we give the homeowners a whole new redesign of the murder area so that they can live more at peace with their house. In fact, I just saw one a few minutes ago for the 2nd season. We're very excited about this. That's been a lot of fun to do. And then I'm doing another project that will be similar to what I did with Rader, but with someone else. And at this time, I can't really reveal a name, but I'm involved in phone calls, writing, and talking to production companies.
When it comes to the Murder House Flip, I know recently Dean Corll's house was put on the market. Are you guys planning on doing anything with that house?
Right now, they've basically stayed in California. I think we've ventured into Arizona for one. We did the Jodi Arias house. I did bring to their attention the Dean Corll house because I'm always on the lookout for when these houses go on the market. But as I remember reading about it, that they had done a complete renovation of it. So we want houses where they haven't done a renovation. We want to be the ones to do the renovation. For example, Dorothy Puente's house in Sacramento, I think it is. She had buried bodies of her tenants. She had acted as sort of a landlady in a boarding house, and she had murdered at least 7 people, maybe 9. And she had planted or buried 7 bodies in the yard. So those bodies were exhumed, but we gave them a wonderful new yard with a pagoda and all kinds of really cool things to sort of take the stigma of the murders away. And that was a pretty cool episode. That was the first episode of Murder House Flip. So that's the kind of thing I'd love to do, Dean Corll's house, but I think if they've already redone it, there wouldn't be a lot left to do.
Yeah, whenever I travel, I make it a point to go to different, infamous locations. Like when I was in Texas, I went to Dean Corll's house, and then Andrea Yates's house, and the children's
Right.
graves, and so on and so forth.
Right. Did you go to Dean Corll's grave?
Yep, we did. We went to go see him and Dorothy, and we didn't have time to go to the boat shed, but next time I'm out there, I would like to do so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's a pretty notorious story.
oh yeah, it's sad. I don't know if I'm sure you know the correlation between John Wayne Gacy and the Corll case, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always found that pretty fascinating, that Gacy is technically a copycat killer, and he's damn near more known than Dean Corll.
Yeah, it's interesting because he definitely got inspiration for the board and the handcuff trick and all that from Corll. I think I don't know. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because he buried the bodies in his crawl space and he was a very successful contractor, whereas Corll was just kind of a loser electrician, not really, he's sort of on the margins of society, and also buried the bodies in a boat shed and on some property rather than living with them. So I think with Gacy, it was the specter of all these bodies living kind of where he's living.
Yeah, almost like revisiting the crime scene, but it's the crime scene is your house. So, I mean, you're just living there, revisiting it.
Plus Gacy had a trial. Corll was shot to death.
Right.
So they didn't really get a chance to do any. I think Corll would have that kind of notoriety had he lived to have a trial. But I think the fact that Henley shot him and that was it. And I know they had a trial for Henley, but it was short and no real defense was put on for him at all. Nobody came to testify. So there really wasn't that much notoriety attached to that. Even though Truman Capote had gone there to cover that trial, he walked out first day.
That's interesting.
So it could have been that Corll would have gotten a lot more notoriety, except for, he was dead, no trial for him. He was actually buried with honors. The American flag was put over his coffin because he had been in the military. And also 1973 is different from 1978 in terms of suddenly we are much more aware of serial killers. Ted Bundy's been caught. We have, others at the time. Whereas with Corll, we had Juan Corona with the 25 migrant workers who buried in mass graves in California. We'd had Manson and a few others like that, but people just didn't know what to make of this. Whereas by 1978, it had been much more publicized in media than it had before. So I think there are a number of factors why Gacy comes out as being much more well known than Corll. Yes, he was very much a copycat of Corll.
I think the whole Pogo and Patches thing adds to his notoriety, because you know how people are terrified of clowns, and a literal killer clown, I think, is what sends it over the edge for people. Like the notoriety and everything.
Yeah, very creepy, certainly.
So where can people purchase your books at and keep up to date with new books and projects that you have going on?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I kind of did away with a website. I think you can just get on Barnes and Noble. Lots and lots of my books are in there, or Amazon. I think it's very easy to find my books. Some of them are academic, so they're not as easy to find. I mean, if you're looking for inside the minds of serial killers or mass murderers or healthcare serial killers, those are academic books. They're still there, but If you're looking for a confession of a serial killer, that's there. It's an Audible book. It's a digital book. There are multiple ways of getting that, but also that was an academic publisher, so that makes it a little bit more. It's not highly expensive. It's a little bit more than a mass market paperback, for example. Other books, I guess, I mean, I think they're all pretty much there or can be gotten in secondhand shops.
I'd like to ask you about the Narcos Satanicos and Sarah Aldretti, being that I've been speaking to Sarah on and off for like 3 or 4 years now, and I'm the only person to get an interview in English, which was maybe 6 minutes, if that, because she cut it very short. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that case because it's, I mean, I always tell people it's like the Mexican Texas Chainsaw Massacre, from, you know, body parts being found to satanic rituals. And Sarah has told me a lot that just is not, you know, sometimes doesn't even comprehend in my mind how sick and twisted and insane these people were. Have you dug much into that case? And if so, what are your thoughts, you know, and opinions from a psychological standpoint, as well as just opinion in general?
Well, I have not read her book. I assume you have.
No, it's in Spanish, actually.
Okay. I haven't read that. And my impression is that she's trying to say she was a captive and that she was not the participant that she's made out to be. She was a college student. She was an ordinary college student, essentially, and got caught up in this cult, which involved human sacrifice and a combination of different religions and philosophies, a sort of warrior cult that required human sacrifice in order to have power for her partner. And it kind of exploded, I know, is when this kid, Mark Kilroy, an American, was found dismembered and, you know, murdered and dismembered in one of their areas. So I don't know what else to say about her. There's not a lot, except that I'm aware that she's trying to say that she was not as implicated in it all as she's made out to be. So I'm very curious why she would limit your conversation with her to 6 minutes rather than seeing this as an opportunity to tell her side of the story.
So part of that, or I should say, like, I'd say 90% of that is there's a documentary that's being worked on right now in Mexico about her case. And she claims that she has like an exclusivity contract and she can't really talk much. And when we got to witchcraft, that's when she cut the interview short, and talking about Adolfo as well. But her and her legal team believe that she'll be out in the next 3 to 5 years, and America's not planning to extradite her for the murder of Mark Kilroy, which I find very hard to believe.
That's surprising to me too, although, so she's been in prison how many years now?
Well, this happened in 89, so longer than I've been alive, 30 something years.
All right, so she served her sentence basically, because her sentence wasn't it a 30-year sentence?
Well, first it was like 600 and something years, and then it was 100 and something. Then I think it's like 55 or something. You can't find the actual sentence anywhere online. That's correct. I had her I guess girlfriend and her attorneys get me that information, and I forget exactly what the amount of time was, but it was like 50 something years, and they're saying that the warden is recommending her release and so on and so forth, but I'm not even sure if any of that's even true.
Yeah, it's hard to say. And also I would never go with what a defense attorney has to say about it, because they always make predictions and maybe they come true, maybe they don't. But I believe that she will have, I know it wasn't a total life sentence. I believe she probably will have a case for getting out. Yeah, and that was my understanding that the United States then would bring her here because of the Mark Kilroy murder. But it could be that they don't have any, even though they found his remains, it could be they don't have any way to link her directly to them. And if that's true, or it could be that even if they convicted her, she could get time served. So what's the point in spending all the money?
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting case. I've become obsessed with it ever since I started talking to Sarah, and the things that she's told me, is just
Like
mind
what?
blowing.
You can't say.
Well, I can say, for instance, the sexual assaults with the drug dealers, she was present,
Hmm.
and she'd basically be uh, performing a spell or ritual or
Right, right.
whatever, and basically before these men were murdered, they'd be bound to animals or objects or whatever it may be. She actually sent me a necklace that she claims has a Nigerian man's spirit inside, and there's blood on the, outside of the teeth or whatever. And she sent me all sorts of Santa Muerte, Santa Maria things that supposedly have this guy's spirit in here, this guy's spirit in here, and she's still into that, to this day, and is real big on witchcraft and spells. And she actually said that she put a spell on an officer in there that was being rude to her for a while, and she said for weeks this officer was just throwing up blood and she was missing work. And she claims that anybody that wrongs her, she'll put witchcraft spells on to this day, and they won't ever be the same.
So aren't you uncomfortable dealing with her? You've asked me about my comfort level. What about yours?
Honestly, no, because I don't believe in that stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
until I have a reason to, I will. But I've had this necklace for like a year and a half now, and nothing's ever happened. I'm not really a believer in the supernatural or anything until something actually happens. I mean, I have all this stuff from dead serial killers and this and that, and I feel like if nothing's happened to me now, nothing
So,
ever
so
will.
why are you interested in cases with these supernatural components?
It wasn't necessarily the supernatural component, but just the fact that it was basically, like cartel and cult and like Satanism all mixed together, which I feel is probably really rare. And the fact that Sarah opened up to me at first, speaking about it, and there's really nothing out there on the case,
Hmm.
that's factually, based. And just speaking to her is what I'm interested in more than anything, and I eventually want to do an interview with her, and like exclusive. And she did tell me once they're done with this documentary, she'll do so. But the more I speak to her, the more I just get drawn into the case. And she's actually invited me to visit her, but Mexico City is not a
Yeah,
good place. And
I would not be doing
her
that.
attorney was murdered a few years ago. Actually, her
Uh,
attorney was representing a cartel informant, and the her attorney had her head cut off. So
wow.
yeah, definitely not a good place to visit. As much as I'd like to, I don't want to lose my life in Mexico City.
What other murderabilia stuff do you have?
Oh, you name it. Eileen Warnos a lot. Of course, Dennis Rader.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of Charles Manson, Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel,
Hmm.
Whitey Bulger. Quite a few. Uh, I'm trying to think of the more obscure and cases.
Well, are they writing you letters or is it drawings
Um,
or what is it that?
well, it's letters, artwork, drawings, so on and so forth. Things that I've picked up over the years as well. Like I was born in '91, so there's some pieces that I have that I could have never got. For instance, like Gerald Stano and
Right.
Gerard Schaefer, and at one point I had some Bundy and Kemper, and just bits and pieces of so much that just history, I guess you could say, in a sense.
Hmm.
But I don't know how you feel about murderabilia. I've heard different professionals give their opinions on it in the past.
I actually just wrote a blog about it that I'll be posting as I teach my final course on my final class of the course about extreme offenders is serial killer culture. And I do talk about murderabilia. I know some vendors. I mean, I found one of my letters online for $200. It was to Dennis Rader, and he had initialed it. So that made it valuable in a way that it wouldn't otherwise have been. It was kind of startling.
Some
Okay.
people would call that a holy grail, being that your work with Rader, and it's
Well, I see.
kind of funny that what people would call holy grails
You don't
and
think his
murderabilia.
initials on it are what made it valuable? Why would a letter from me be valuable?
him either initialing or signing a letter to your signature is, basically you're the only one that he's basically trusting and working with, I imagine, at this point in time. And that plus the confession of a serial killer, the
Right.
infamy and so on and so forth. And
Yeah, so I have actually a ton of stuff from him, drawings and whatnot, but I think that belongs to the victims' families. So that's not something I would put out to do anything with, but I don't know. I understand the talismanic effect of it. There are people who think if they have something a killer touched or licked or grew, somehow that gives them an aura. They're touching something the killer touched, or they like the self portraits or whatever. And it has roots really in the 19th century in some of the murder exhibits that were put out by forensic scientists to try to teach the public about this. So that's what my blog is about, is really, this comes from the effort to educate, and then it grew into this marketplace. So I really try to give some context to it, but in some cases, it's people are superstitious. Some people are just see it as an investment, like any other collectible. Some people just like being close without being in danger to an extreme offender. So I don't know. I don't have any particular opinion about it in terms of whether people should or shouldn't do it, but I do know it's offensive to victims' family members, and that's always something to consider.
Yeah, with the 13 years of items that I've procured over the years, I'm actually working on a 4-volume picture book of sort when it comes to murderabilia, and I'm actually working with an author in the UK that's helping me put it all together, and it's going to be like a 4-volume picture book of artwork, documents, letters, so on and so forth, from the most infamous, in my collection. Well, I think we can, go ahead and wrap this up. I appreciate you, again, taking the time. I know you're super busy with everything you got going on.
Well, it was fun to talk to you, and you had good questions, and very interesting that you've spoken to these 2 particular offenders. Rudiger, I'm sure, couldn't get much out of, because he is delusional, but I think it's interesting I would encourage you to follow up on the other one.
That was my interview with Dr. Katherine Ramsland. If you like what you heard, make sure you subscribe, hit that thumbs up button, and go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/unforbidden-truth, to get access to extra content, additional perks and merch, and much more. Thank you for listening.